All right, we're going to look at Francis Bacon's essay of marriage and family life. And with that, I want to say a few words. um, First of all, it's an essay. And with an essay, we would expect an essay to follow the regular formatting of the experimental sciences, the natural sciences, namely presenting some form of hypothesis and then a methodology which would be followed in order to prove whether the thesis was true or false. That is not what we're going to find in Bacon's essay here. He does not provide anything like a hypothesis to what he believes about marriage and single life. Rather, he follows the same sort of thought experiment that would be characteristic of the form that Michel de Montaigne uses, as I said in the previous two episodes. So he introduces the subject of marriage and single life and states his case. These two things he does right from the outset, and then provides an outline of where the subject is going to go before providing proofs and refutations, and then finally concluding his essay. Now, these are 6 parts of his essay: an introduction, a statement of the case, an outline of the whole subject matter of marriage and single life, various proofs coming forward on that have been asserted by various people, various ways of looking at the subject, refutations of various false ways of understanding the subject before finally concluding this. So these are parts of his essay. Note that they are not paragraphs. If I looked at it in terms of paragraphs, I only see 2. But as I said to you last time, Bacon is not following the model of using paragraphs to organize his prose. Rather, he is using something called the period, which is a classical mode of organizing thoughts. And again, I say to you that that is because in Bacon's mind, it is his thoughts that he is trying to present to us. And he is not so influenced by the material fact of writing that he thinks that his words relate to his words, let alone to the world around us. They relate first and foremost to his thoughts, and his thoughts are best organized in terms of the principle of repetition and variation. In other words, parallelism, which we can see is also the format in which the Bible itself is written. And if we had time here, we could talk about biblical poetry and the way it is organized, etc. But you could also do the exact same thing when looking at the Pauline epistles. But we're not going to do that here. I'm just going to state what I already have stated. So those elements are there in his essay. And I think it's a very helpful understanding what an essay does. And it is a brilliant example thereof. So let's come to this topic of marriage and single life. Note that finally, by way of introductory comments, this is not a how-to, let alone a 5 steps to be married or the 5 best features of a single life. He's not enumerating. Again, he's not following that PowerPoint approach to understanding things. He is also not providing a self-help view of things. That's the product of a therapeutic culture, a psychological culture, a culture in which a guru tells you how you are to take charge of your own life. Rather, Mr. Bacon is looking at what both classical and Christian authors have said about the topic of marriage and single life, and also using his own observations. And it's told in typically witty fashion. And he draws comparisons between the various merits of the two. So he starts with a very sudden statement, an arresting statement, typical of Bacon, typical of the good essay. He says, that hath wife and children hath given hostages to fortune, for they are impediments to great enterprises, either of virtue or mischief. So that is his opening gambit. It is, if you have a wife and child and children, then you are giving hostages to fortune. Now, what does he mean by fortune here? He does have a monetary aim in view, to be sure, and to some degree this is correct. However, there's more than that. He is thinking of fortuna, You are subject more to the vicissitudes of life because you are not only responsible for your own life if you are married, but you are responsible for the lives of others. And those vicissitudes of life will include things like sickness and health, riches and poverty, and all of the things that can happen not to an individual, but now will be amplified in a manifold way because now you're including the lives of others under your care and concern. And in particular, you will be responsible for looking after them as the head of this household, as the husband of your wife. You will have to care and provide for her. So that is also in his mind here as he introduces this. And so you are given hostages to fortune. And there will be things beyond your control then if you endeavor on this. And these are also, he adds to this, impediments to great enterprises, either of virtue or mischief. So it will limit you in your own personal life in order to, if you should endeavor to be married, you will be limited. Your own personal greatness, whether that is for good or for ill, will be impeded. That's how he begins it. And this seems to me an entirely realistic understanding of what happens. He goes on to observe, certainly the best works and of greatest merit for the public have proceeded from the unmarried or childless men, which both in affection and means have married and endowed the public. So they live for the public good because they have no private good. And so he assumes here, by the way, the public and the private realms, and that they his readers understand that furthermore. So he does not need to illustrate examples, but he could have brought forth Jesus himself, who was unmarried. He could have brought forth Socrates, I believe, and certainly other philosophers of the ancient world. So the life of the single man can be devoted to his own interests, or if he should choose, the public's interest. And so the great works can be done there without any other limitations on his time. He adds, yet it were a great reason that those that have children should have greatest care of future times, unto which they know they must transmit their dearest pledges. So this is now he introduces a new element to this, which is that somebody who is married is not considered with the public good in a present sense only, but also thinks about the consequences of policy in a futuristic sense. So now he is somewhat backtracking on what he said about doing public good by single men, because the married man will consider not only his own generation, but the future generations in this. So now he's, as I say, to some degree amending what he said at the outset. Some there are who thought they lead a single life, yet their thoughts do end with themselves and account future times impertinences. So this is why you would not do that. Nay, there are some others that account wife and children but as bills of charges. So this is simply the financial aspects that I mentioned here. Nay, more, there are some foolish, rich, covetous men that take a pride in having no children because they may be thought so much the richer. So he's talking about the absurdity of the position, pushing it to its extremity, the argumentum ad ridiculum. And he says, and you've heard some people even talk such, and one is a great rich man, and another takes exception to it. Yea, but he hath a great charge of children. So he starts by recommending the single life and then speaks against it and its folly. So he, again, very interesting way of introducing the subject. Then he goes on back to his opening gambit of recommending the single life. He says, unmarried men are best friends, best masters, best servants, but not always best subjects. For they are light to run away, and almost all fugitives are of that condition. A single life doth well with churchmen, for charity will hardly water the ground where it must first fill a pool. It is indifferent for judges, the single life, and magistrates, for if they be facile and corrupt, you shall have a servant 5 times worse than a wife. Says that rather tongue-in-cheek. For soldiers, I find the generals commonly in their hortatives put men in mind of their wives and children. And I think the despising of marriage among the Turks maketh the vulgar soldier more base. Again, looking at the advantages and disadvantages, now note that he does this in various spheres of life. As we said with Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and the men and women in it merely players. And there are different stages of life. There are also different vocations in life, all of which he is touching upon here in this brief little essay. Certainly, wife and children are a kind of discipline of humanity. And single men, though they may be many times more charitable because they have more money, because their means are less exhausted, yet on the other side, they are more cruel and hard-hearted, good to make severe inquisitors, because their tenderness is not so oft called upon as somebody in married life will be, whose tenderness is called upon by his wife and also by his children. This has a character effect. He calls this a form of discipline, which of course it is. And now he's going to bring various illustrations forth to illustrate the exact same. Grave natures, led by custom and therefore constant, are commonly loving husbands, as was said of Odysseus. Vetulam suam pretulats immortalitati. So what does that say? He preferred his old wife to immortality. He preferred to return home to Penelope rather than stay with the nymph Calypso and be immortal with her. And so this made him a good husband. And he clearly is a figure of wisdom and restraint. And so Bacon is recommending the single life, or rather the married life, for that reason. Furthermore, chaste women are often proud and froward, as presuming upon the merit of their chastity. Now, this is a single woman, but not necessarily a single woman. Chastity refers both to the state of singleness as well as the state of marriage. And he says, it is one of the best bonds, both of chastity and obedience in the wife, if she think her husband wise. If she think her husband wise. Not that he be wise, but if she think it so. Which she will never do if she finds him jealous. Wives are young men's mistresses, companions for middle age, and old men's nurses. Now he's talking about the married life, but the different stages of women, that is wives within the married life, they serve play a different role, as it were. So as a man may have a quarrel to marry when he will, but yet he was reputed one of the wise men that made answer to the question when a man should marry. And now he's going to come to his rather witty conclusion. A young man, not yet. An elder man, not at all. It is often seen, this is by Thales, the great pre-Socratic philosopher, one of the 7 sages of the ancient world. It is often seen that bad husbands, he says, have very good wives, whether it be that it raiseth the price of their husband's kindness when it comes, or that the wives take a pride in their patience. Note that he is not sure of the motivation, and there is a positive one and there's a negative one, a sinful motivation for this, even for a good behavior. Again, entirely prudent and wise and discriminating consideration here. But this, and now is the conclusion, never fails. If the bad husbands were of their own choosing, against their friends' consent, for then they will be sure to make good their own folly. Now, this is speaking of the wives. If the wives have not listened to their friends, when their friends warn them that this was a bad man to marry, what we will surely see is a wife trying to show her friends were wrong. And she will thereby exhibit a patience and a kindness and an excellence that will try to make the man what he clearly was not. So I conclude with this. His discussion of marriage and single life is not a thesis. It is a study in the human condition, and in this case, the condition of being either married or single.